Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I am really happy to be here in this wonderful campus, this wonderful city. And well, today I will talk a little bit about my recent research on the role of meaning in teacher emotional experience, and I am investigating this issue especially in relation to the problem of teacher burnout, which is a pervasive and important problem of educational systems around the world. And well, I will try to share with you a little bit how we approach the study of meaning in emotional experience, and then I will share some of the results of our research, right? So my presentation will have these three parts. First of all, I will try to share some important, also some basic theoretical foundations of our research. First of all, I will try to share what is for me, emotional experience, how I conceptualize emotional experience, and then also how I conceptualize the meaning that mediates emotional experience. And after that, I will share some results of the research. First of all, results about the role of meaning in teacher emotional experience, and then results about how to transform meaning to transform also the teacher's emotional experience, right? And finally, very briefly, just some next steps of our current research. Okay, so well, the first issue is, of course, what is emotional experience, because this is not an easy question. It's a question. There is a lot of discrepancy about that, but there is agreement about some of the components of emotional experience, specifically with three components of emotional experience, which are feeling, that is the physiological response of the organism which is involved in the emotional experience. A second component is meaning or cognition. More or less everybody agrees with that. And finally, the third component is behavior or action, readiness, or some disposition to behave, which is also involved in emotional experience. The problem, however, is how to articulate these three components. Here, there is a lot of discrepancy about how these three components are articulated and how we should understand emotion and emotional experience. So, our conceptualization is based on Vygotskian cultural psychology, and basically we assume that there is emotional experience involves a dialectical relation between subject and object, so that the subject transforms the object and generates outcomes. But, and this is important, at the same time, as part of the same process, also the object transforms the subject and generates feeling, which was one of the components that I mentioned before. A second aspect which is important in our conceptualization is that this double process, this dialectical process, is mediated by meaning, and that this meaning is a cultural artifact. It's not like an internal meaning. It's not an internal representation, it's a cultural artifact which is distributed socially in the community. And then within this scheme, we consider that the transformation of the object by the subject is what we can call action, or behavior, action, readiness, etc. And the transformation of the subject by the object is what we can call emotion. Both emotion and action are mediated by meaning. This is like our conceptualization of the thing, right? This conceptualization, as I said, is different from many other conceptualizations of emotional experience, especially from cognitive approaches. One first difference is that for us, meaning is a cultural material artifact, not an internal mental representation. I already mentioned that, but it is an important point for us. And as a cultural material artifact, is socially distributed in communities and also appropriated by participants in these communities. Also that the process is bidirectional. It goes from the subject to the object and not from the object to the subject at the same time, which is also a difference with cognitive conceptualizations. Also that emotion and action, and that's related with the preceding point, emotion and action are two aspects of the same process. That means that for us, emotion and action are a unity, but not an identity. This is an important. They are analytically different, but work as a unity, emotion and action. And finally, that it's the same meaning that mediates both emotion and action, since they are a unity in the process, and this process is mediated by meaning. The same meaning mediates at the same time emotion and action. So the thing for us is to understand this meaning and to understand how this meaning mediates this process, right? The first question is, well, how is this meaning? Which are the characteristics of this meaning? And here we have plenty of previous research from a lot of very different approaches, which suggest several characteristics of this meaning, which are interesting. The first one is that it seems to be a situational meaning, a holistic situational meaning. That means that it's a meaning that permits us to grasp a complex situation as a whole and at once. It's not like a sum of different perceptions, but we have a complex situation and we get the situation at once as a holistic unity, right? A second characteristic is that it seems to be narrative, this meaning. Narrative in the sense of Brunner. And as a narrative is distributed in communities and appropriated by participants in these communities. And finally, and this is also important, the structure of this meaning seems to be complex in the sense that it's narrative, but it seems to be also conceptual, to articulate concepts and themes, like conceptual systems, right? So the challenge here is to try to understand this complex structure of this meaning, to be able to understand its role in emotional experience. Our approach to the structure of meaning is based on the work of Greimas, and we assume that we can distinguish three levels of meaning to understand its structure. The first level would be the superficial organization of discourse that we call the aesthetic level of the meaning. Then we would have the narrative structure of discourse that we call the structural level of meaning. And after that, and then we have the themes, the conceptual systems which are articulated by this meaning, that we call the semiotic level of meaning. I will try to put an example to explain a little bit this organization. So for example, here we have an example of one teacher who says, "Today's students do not find English useful in any way. They do not want to know anything, so it feels bad to me because I have to teach English regardless of whether you will use it or not," right? This is like the direct discourse of the teacher. This would be like the superficial level of the discourse, like the aesthetic level of the meaning, right? So to move from this aesthetic level to the structural level, we use a kind of notation which is called modal syntax, which is also based on Greimas. And this kind of notation is based on the idea that the minimal narrative unit is a transformation of a conjunction. And this is what we call a function, right? And the transformation of a conjunction, it can be represented as an actant, this A of an actant who enacts a function with a certain modality. I will explain now the thing of modality. An actant who enacts a function with a certain modality that conjoins or disjoins two other actants, put together or separate two other actants. For example, we can say a function of me with a modality of having to do, put together students and English. This would be the modal syntax notation for this for this here. I have to teach English, right? I have to teach English. In modal notation would be that way. We have a function of an actant, in this case it's me. With the modality, I have to put together students and English, two actants. The students together conjoined with English, right? So, okay, now in this example, the modality was having to do, right? But we can also find other different modalities. Specifically, we distinguish, also following grammars, 5 different modalities. Having to do, wanting to do, knowing how to do, being able to do, and doing. That is, for example, I have to put together students with English. I want to put together students with English. I know how to put together students with English. I'm able to do it. I'm putting together students with English. So this would be the 5 different modalities. Among these modalities, the first 2, having to do and wanting to do, are especially important because they give a direction to the narrative. And the functions with these 2 modalities is what we call a narrative program. Narrative program is a function with one of these 2 modalities, having to do or wanting to do. Okay, now we have said that the minimal narrative unit is the function. Now we can move to the minimal narrative structure. The minimal narrative structure is a minimum relationship between 2 functions. In this case, when we talk about the minimal narrative structure, we talk about the relationship between a narrative program, that is a function with a modality of having to do, wanting to do, and between a narrative program and any other function. And this kind of a structure is what we call a narrative nucleus. So this would be one narrative program of me, actant me, with one of these 2 modalities, having to do, wanting to do, in relationship with any other function of any actant. And this relationship can be a relationship of congruence or a relationship of contradiction. It's a relationship of congruence when the function realize the narrative program, and it's of contradiction when the function contradicts the realization of the narrative program. So, for example, I have to teach students, right? This would be a narrative program, but the students doesn't learn English, for example, right? Then would be a function. This would be a narrative nucleus of contradiction, because the function of the students contradicts the realization of my narrative program. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but okay. So now we can go from the aesthetic level of that example to its structural level. So we already read the aesthetic level, and now structurally would be like this kind of contradiction. I have to teach English to students, and the students do not want to learn English. So here we have the narrative program and the function by the students with the modality of not wanting to do, which contradicts the narrative program. And this in modal syntax would be that way. But today I will more or less work with this kind of, to make it a little bit easier, right? But usually we work with that notation when we work in the structural level. Okay, now from the structural level we can move to the semiotic level. When dealing with the semiotic level, we are dealing with conceptual systems, right? So the issue here is how to grasp a unity of analysis that represents a minimal conceptual system. And here we also follow Gramers, and we use what he calls the semiotic square. Yeah? Semiotic square is a minimal conceptual system, and it's defined basically as an opposition of 2 sems, of 2 concepts, and this opposition generates the contraries of each of the sems. So we have a conceptual systems of 4 sems. So the 2 in opposition and the contraries of each sem, right? I will put an example now. And also in the semiotic square, there is always the euphoric axis and the dysphoric axis. The euphoric axis are the sems in the conceptual systems that denote something like good, like to be understandable. And the dysphoric axis are the concepts which denote something as bad. For example, life, death, right? If we have the opposition life, death, we have life in the euphoric axis and death at the dysphoric axis. But for example, if we have, imagine that we have an opposition between death and suffering, for example, then we could have death in opposition with suffering at the euphoric axis and suffering at the dysphoric axis. So that's why it's important, this idea of opposition, because the conceptual system, we cannot define the meaning of a concept without a conceptual system, without an opposition with another concept. The concept of death means something in opposition to life and means a different thing in opposition to suffering, for example, right? So now, if we go back to the example, then we can try to go to the semiotic level. If we look at the function involved, the function of the students don't want to learn English in the structural level. This function in the aesthetic level is articulated by means of these sentences. Students do not find English useful in any way. They do not want to know anything, so it feels bad to me, right? So here we have an articulation at the semiotic level of no usefulness, because do not find English useful. We find here the idea of no usefulness and the idea of no knowledge. I put here ignorance, but actually it's no knowledge. They not want to know anything, right? And these sems are situated at the dysphoric axis, because so it feels bad to me, right? So from here we can understand the conceptual system that this teacher is using, like to make meaning of this function of the students, right? This is the idea. Okay, so now that we more or less share like the way that we approach to the study of meaning in emotional experience, now I will present some of the results of this research, right? First of all, I will present some results about the role of narrative structures in teacher emotional experience, and after that I will present some results about how this meaning can be transformed to transform also emotional experience. Well, when we talk about the role of narrative structures in emotional experience, since we are talking about narrative structures, we are dealing with the structural level of meaning, right? So here the main unit of analysis is the narrative nucleus. So here we work with narrative nuclei, okay? Here we can distinguish 15 types of narrative nuclei, because we have all narrative nuclei have one, it's one narrative program, like I want to do something or I have to do something, and it's a relationship between the different kinds of functions and modalities with this narrative program. So we can see here a relationship between the narrative program and functions of others, and a relationship between this narrative program and functions of me, right? And at the same time, we can see relationships of contradiction and relationships of congruence, right? So from this combination, we can distinguish these 15 types of narrative nuclei. For example, the they narrative nuclei of contradiction, it's they don't want, or they don't have to, they don't know how, they cannot, they don't do. And the they narrative nuclei of congruence, it's they want, they know how, they can, they do, and the same for the me or the I narrative nuclei, right? So here, to study the role of narrative nuclei in teacher emotional experience, we analyzed 73 teacher narratives. We interviewed 73 teachers and analyzed their narratives, and we analyzed the prevalence of each type of narrative nuclei in each narrative. We also controlled for working conditions, and then we conducted a hierarchical regression in order to look how the prevalence of each type of narrative nuclei predicted different indicators of teacher emotional experience. The indicators were these 5. They were emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, which is a kind of feeling of distance with the students or parents, personal accomplishment, bounce back resilience, which is like the ability to recover after a strong episode of stress, and eudaimonic well-being, right? And well, these were our results. We found that several narrative nuclei predicted the different indicators of emotional experience. Here there is a summary, right? For example, we can see that, for example, for the congruence nuclei, it's important they know how, they can, for example, and I do. They are the most predictive types of nuclei for emotional experience, predict better emotional experience. And for the contradiction nuclei, we see that the most predictive ones are that they don't want, they can't, also especially for the personalization and emotional exhaustion, they don't do, especially for bounce back resilience, and I don't do, especially for well-being, right? And the contradiction nuclei predict, in general, worse emotional experience. Another observation of these results is that the day nuclei, the day type nuclei, are especially important. You can see that the day nuclei are more predictive, or there are more day nuclei which are predictive than I nuclei, right? That means that that suggests that when we narrate or we think about our experience, it's especially important how we narrate the actions of others. This seems to be especially important for emotional experience, right? And another observation is that the modality here matters. It's important, the modality. For example, just as an example, a curious finding. Here we can see the contradiction nuclei. We can see this contradictory nuclei. They don't do. Do you see that? They don't do. This one. They don't do nuclei. This nucleus is a strong predictor of low bounce back resilience. But look that they can't and they don't know how, these other two, which are also contradictory, they nuclei are protective for this, for bounce back resilience, right? That means, or that suggests that it's better, for example, it's better to say, for example, this student didn't know how to do her homework. It's better to say that, or it's better to think about what happened in that way than thinking about this student didn't do her homework. Because this structure of not doing, it's risky, and the other one is protective, right? So, well, the modality matters, it seems. Okay, now I will move to present some findings about how these meanings, how these narrative structures can be transformed. So we have seen that there are some narrative structures which are better for emotional experience other than are worse, or more predict better emotional experience, others predict worse emotional experience. But can we modify these narrative structures in the narrative of a teacher? This was the question, right? And here what we studied several teachers who conducted this kind of transformation of their narrative and together with the transformation of their emotional experience. And we tried to understand which kind of narrative mechanism, semio-narrative mechanism they used to conduct this transformation, right? So here I will present, if I have time, 3 of these semio-narrative mechanisms. Elaborating antecedents, semiotic, semantic change, and hybridization. Elaborating antecedents consist of modifying the antecedents of certain functions. I will provide examples now. Semantic change means changing the meaning of an event or a function. So this semantic change operates mainly at the semiotic level, and a hybridization It's merging, when we have contradictory relation between two functions, we can merge the two functions in a new function that overcomes the contradiction. I will provide now examples. I don't know, how am I in time? Okay, I will begin with the elaboration of antecedents because it's perhaps the simpler one. So here we have an example of a teacher. In all these examples, I will say moment one and moment two. Moment one is before the transformation of the narrative and before the transformation of the emotional experience. Moment two is after the transformation, right? So in moment one, this teacher said, look, I've never really liked talking with any parents. I like to have a lot of contact with the student and to keep the parent on the sidelines. I remember once, for example, there were these parents of students who didn't like a grade I had given her, and the parents came in to defend their daughter, and I really struck with that. I had to tell my partner, come with me because I don't know if I'll be able to get out of it. The girl was spoiled by her parents. I don't like it because I know there are parents, I've got the feeling that some of the parents are trouble, and I don't want to have that trouble. I've created something for myself here, like a little barrier, and I don't want, right? This would be the aesthetic level of the meaning. At the structural level here, basically what we have is, here we have a function of I don't know how, here, I don't know how, that generates a narrative program of I don't want contact with families, and then we have a contradiction with a function by the parents who came in to defend their daughters. And the parents came to defend their daughter because the student didn't like the grade, and also because the student was spoiled by her parents. And as a result, the teacher suffered, right? Okay, now moment two, after 2 years. After 2 years, we interviewed again this teacher, and the teacher explained again or remembered again the same situation. And this is how she narrates the situation now. She said, for example, I remember there was a student, the second or third year, who got really, well, I gave her a grade on an assessment, and she really kicked up a fuss. She thought it was just rotten, the worst, and blah, 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 and I didn't know how to handle that, how to respond, how to justify that grade, because I myself realized that there was some subjectivity on my part in that grade. And that objectivity that the students were looking for, that they are always looking for, especially when they need to pass, because it was a failing grade, right? That's where it all started. So I remember her father called, he came in and complained, and I was super worried. It was something I didn't know how to handle. So this is the structure of the moment one, and how this structure changed now in two different important ways. The first important modification is that the reason why the reason why the parents came in to defend their daughter is not anymore because the student didn't like a grade and the student was spoiled, but it's because the student was looking for objectivity and I gave her a subjective grade. This is the first important change. And the second important change is that it's because I gave her a subjective grade that I don't know how to handle that. So the reason why I don't know how to handle with parents is because I gave her a subjective grade, right? So from this re-narration now, the teacher can modify like things, the situation actually, because she says, I'm not afraid of anything. If I were facing a similar situation, first of all, we might reach that point, but these days I do we would, because I have made things very clear. Because the thing is, you have to make things very clear. You have to be very clear and straightforward. You have to be very responsible. So I do that now. The first and second year, I might not have explained how I graded, and I might not have had an established objective method or mechanism either. Now you do it and you know exactly what you are doing. You do a good job. You give your guidelines, your objective and everything. It is all very clear. And if it's not clear for someone, you feel strong enough to defend any decision you've made. I wouldn't be worried. So from this, Re-narration, now the situation can be easily changed because I gave her a subjective grade. Okay, I give objective grades. And when I give objective grades, now I know how to get out of it. And since I know how to get out of it, the narrative program of not wanting contact with family disappears. So the contradiction disappears. And the suffering also disappears, right? This is the kind of transformation by means of elaborating the antecedents, in this case, the antecedents of the function which was contradictory with the narrative program, right? Okay, let's move to an example of a different mechanism. Here we will also see elaboration of antecedents, but the point here will be to show a different mechanism, which is the semantic change. Here the same. We have the moment one. At the moment one, the teacher said, for example, I had some really conflictive students in class and thinking, now what am I going to do? Or having kids who felt removed from the curriculum when everyone was talking about success, and how we had to be by their side, and how we had to close the gap between the kids and the curriculum, and suddenly you think, what am I contributing, right? What am I giving this child? Encountering children who would knock my pencils on the floor, I'm not going to do what you say, period, right? Students who maybe in the middle of class had punched the wall and left a gaping hole in it, right? I used to feel more of that, more guilt, saying it's my fault, or it's because I didn't handle it well. I don't know how to deal with these attitudes, and that's why these things happen, right? Here, the basic structure of this narrative is like we have two contradictions. We have one narrative program. I have to be by the pupil side and close the gap with the curriculum, and then a contradiction with I don't know how to do that. And as a consequence, because I don't know how to do that, as a consequence, the students behave badly. So we have one contradiction of one I contradiction and one they contradiction, contradiction with the student's function, right? Importantly here, because we are now looking to a mechanism which functions on the semiotic level. Importantly here is to see that this function by the students behave badly. Here in this narrative is articulating the dysphoric axis, is articulating the ideas of insubordination, ignorance, distance in opposition to instruction, knowledge, proximity, etc., right? Okay, now let's go to the moment two. At the moment two, the teacher says, now I think more about all right, what's going on here? Maybe he just has this need, or all right, why doesn't he do his homework? Well, why? Let's look at why he isn't doing his homework. Let's look at what's going on with this child. When he gets home, what kind of environment does he have, And in that sense, I'm more relaxed in the sense that, well, I am there for him, I am by his side, and when there are situations like this, more complicated ones, when a student, well, I think I'm calmer than I used to be, I think I'm learning, I'm calmer, I'm more relaxed. I try to listen to the student. This is important. I take advantage of any chance. I get to talk about these issues. I also listen more, look deeper inside. Why did this child do that, What is he trying to tell me? This is important. What is he trying to tell me? Whereas before, it was all a bit different. I didn't approach things like that. And in that sense, I feel better, much stronger when I come here. Well, what happens here? This was the previous structure. The first modification is one of elaboration of antecedents, because this I don't know how is substituted by students have familiar problems. So the cause of the origin of the student's behavior is not that I don't know how to do things. It's because students have some problems, perhaps at home, right? And here, the most interesting thing here is that now these students behave badly. For her now, it's a way that the student finds to communicate her students at home. So now, at the semiotic level, this function of a student behave badly articulates a very different conceptual system. It's a conceptual system about communication or expression or repression. And in this conceptual system, this function articulates the euphoric axis of this conceptual system. It's seen as an instance of expression, of communication. in opposition of repression or omission, right? And because of this, this is what is the semantic change. There is a change in the meaning of the function of the students. And because of this change, then like I can just listen to the student, because the student is trying to tell me something, I just listen to them, and because I listen to them, this is congruent with the narrative program, right? So it disappears also the contradiction. Okay, this was an example of semantic change. Now an example of hybridization. Here we have a teacher at the moment 1 who says, I was with a group of 4th graders one day. I think we were well. We were doing that, playing English. At first I said, all right, let's get started. I don't know, pick 3 people and get to work. Find a place to go in the classroom and start. Well, it was really loud. They were fighting among themselves, and then at one point I was helping some of them, and one kid made to hit another, and he banged his hand on the corner of a table, and the whole hand just swelled up. You know, when that happened, it was just like, oh God, I mean, because I had tried to do things my way, you know, the class dynamic was completely destroyed. Felt like I hadn't handled it right, you know. The group, I mean, I hadn't managed to understand how the group worked, and that's why it had happened. Felt more like it was my fault. I mean, I was to blame. I mean, you are the teacher and you are in charge of a group of children. So here the basic structure is we have one narrative program. I want them to learn English through play. This is important. It's through play that I want them to learn English. And I don't know how, which is similar to the previous example. And because I don't know how, then the student hurts herself, and this function is contradictory with my responsibility as a teacher, right? At the moment too, she said, well, now I don't blame the kids. I don't blame myself. I mean, I do blame myself. I'm partly to blame because that's also true, but it's also partly due to how they have always approached their schoolwork and how they are used to doing things. Meaning the way I work, which is basically in groups, isn't going to work with them. I understand, I mean, at the time, it was like you have to change the way you do things. You can't always do everything the way you want. But so yeah, work with groups, but you are the ones who stay seated. They didn't get up to do things. Sometimes I would let them, because I would prepare like math for plays, that kind of things, and I would let them get up, and well, like I was saying, they would start testing and all that. So from then on, it was like, no, everyone stays seated. And then, well, what I saw really clearly, that I had to change a little, was that I had to draw on both things a bit. In other words, I had to do some things that they were already used to doing, and then gradually bring in bits and pieces of my own way of doing things, like doing lots of group activities. So here, the first change is similar to the previous example, that I don't know how is substituted by a different function. This is an elaboration of an antecedent, right? And in this case, it's a student doesn't know. Students don't know. Students are used to working seated. So the contradiction is between I want them to learn English through play. It's contradictory with the students are used to work seated, and because they are used to working seated, is that they hard, right? But here, the hybridization point is that from this, what this teacher says is that, okay, so let's modify the narrative program and let's incorporate the idea of what they are used to do in the narrative program. So the narrative program now will be, I want them to learn English through play, but seated, not moving around. And when I merge like these two ideas, what they do and what I want to do, I change a little bit the narrative program. The contradiction disappears and becomes a congruence, and as a consequence, also the bad consequence of that also disappears. Okay. Well, these were like 3 examples of different mechanisms we are investigating and we are identifying to understand how narrative can change and how this can also change the emotional experience of teachers. Now, just very briefly to finish my presentation, then just to share with you the next steps of our research. The first thing we are trying to do now is to identify more semiotic narrative mechanisms or understand better the narrative mechanisms that we have already identified, right? Then the big challenge we have now, we're working on now, is to understand the social dynamics of these transformations. So we are trying to understand how all these transformations of the narrative and the emotional experience may happen within social interaction in a microgenetic, from a microgenetic approach to try to understand how the interaction is related with the changes in the narrative, how the narrative that come from somebody are appropriated by another and are, I don't know, related between them, and all these kind of dynamics, of social dynamics, which permit the transformation of the narrative is what we are really trying to study at that point, right? And we are trying to study the social dynamics in terms of group interaction, the vocal dynamics in terms of the use of the voices here, and how the different voices and the different narrative and counter-narrative are going in the conversation, etc. Especially in a context of dialogic interaction between peers. We are trying to study how all this happen in this context. And also finally, and very in a close relation to that, also we are trying to understand the form of facilitation within these groups of dialogic reflection, forms of facilitation that promote that the conversation goes in a direction that may permit the transformation of the narratives. We are just starting a new project of research which is very much focused on these issues of the social dynamics. If you are curious or if you are interested, you can take a look at our webpage, which is this www.erims.udl.cat. And in the context of this project, we are trying also to build an international community of people researching, interested about teachers and teaching. So if you are interested, you can just write me. We are just only figuring out how to articulate this community, but well, you are all invited. So okay, that's it. Thank you very much.